Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Aaron Porras, and today we are returning for our latest installment of Election Watch Israel Part 4. This as we get closer and closer to the fourth recurring Israeli election cycle in just 2 years' time. So what's the latest, though? How are the parties breaking down, and what is likely to happen next? Well, joining me now to discuss is Director of English Operations for the Yamina Party, Jeremy Saltan, and Uri Zaki, founder of the Front for the Protection of Democracy and board chairperson for the Meretz Party Executive Committee. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, to start the story, we start with the most recent breakdown. New political polls on Israeli Hebrew media showing that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party and Yair Lapid's oppositional Yesh Atid party are both gaining strength ahead of the March elections. Likud expected now to take home 32 Knesset seats, and Yesh Atid expected to take 18, followed now in third place by ex-Likud Minister Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope party, which is predicted to get 14 mandates. Now, Uri, I'll start with you, I guess. Is this basically going to be the big rivalry, Netanyahu versus Lapid? You know, there was mention of Sa'ar maybe, earlier in the polls he was in second place. Now he's dropped. Do you think that that's really the trend that's going to continue?
I'm not sure, although I prefer, of course, Lapid to Sa'ar as a potential prime minister rather than Netanyahu, because Mr. Sa'ar is part of the Likud originally, and he's a right-wing leader. Having said all that, I think, presenting the Israeli elections as a battle of two parties is misleading, although many voters in Israel feel this way. I mean, it's not something that is done intentionally. It's just easier this way. But as we know, it's not relevant who is the biggest party. The issue that is most relevant is which is the biggest bloc, who gets the 61 votes to form a new coalition. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu in the last elections was leading the biggest party. In the second elections, wasn't leading the biggest party, but never in the last 3 cycles did he have a majority to form his own government. And that's why he went to this unity government that failed so quickly. Well, so the question is, what is the biggest bloc? Now, it's interesting that you have Jeremy here, because Jeremy's party right now is the only party in the Israeli Knesset right now which doesn't say what's its position regarding a government led by Netanyahu. I mean, you have from Sa'ar all the way to the joint list saying we would not go with Netanyahu. So you have there both right-wing parties like Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope and Lieberman's Israel Beitenu, with left parties like Meretz and others. And then you have in the Netanyahu bloc, you have the ultra-Orthodox parties and Netanyahu himself. Bennett so far didn't say, I mean, he says, I'm running for prime minister. Okay, but according to the polls, you're not getting there. What is your option? And in many ways, he might play a role in determining who is the next prime minister of Israel.
All right. Well, I want to get into the block sizes and whether or not one party or another does have a chance to form a coalition. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But in the meantime, Jeremy, yeah, I mean, it's true that Yamina has been fairly quiet recently. Where is Bennett and Yamina sitting at this point?
I don't think that we're being quiet. Naftali Bennett just had 2 Facebook Lives yesterday, including a very important, I feel, press conference in which he brought 2 global experts from different countries to talk about what the vaccinations mean, various questions. And of course, the press, all they did was ask questions about the politics, about yes, Netanyahu, no, Netanyahu. And I guess that's what a lot of people in the media would prefer this election to be. Let's forget that there's a coronavirus. Let's forget that there's 1 million people unemployed. And I think that, at least when I'm talking to voters, that what they care about is going back to work. What they care about is making sure that they and their family are safe. But sure, if you want, I'll answer your question. And I think Naftali's also answered that very well. It might not be sufficient for Uri, but what the answer is, and it's very clear, Naftali Bennett is running for the Prime Minister of Israel. When it comes to the president's residence, we are not going to recommend Netanyahu. If you are running for Prime Minister, it's very clear. You think that you should be prime minister, not Netanyahu, not Gideon Sa'ar, not Yair Lapid. Naftali Bennett and everyone in Yamina thinks that Naftali Bennett should be prime minister. When it comes to the president's residence, where you have to put in nominations, he's made the commitment. He is not going to be putting in anything for Netanyahu. He's not going to be putting in anything for any other candidate. He's going to be recommending himself in the president's residence. Now, when people ask, well, okay, let's say you go ahead and do that, and the polls are what the polls happen to be today, what's going to end up happening? And what Naftali says, and he's really the only one who's being honest about this, is that he doesn't know what's going to end up happening at that point. He says that he's not in anybody's pocket, and that we will make decisions based on what the actual situation happens to be when we leave the president's residence and we see what the nominations are following that process. Now, what I've seen, and I think what all of Israelis have seen, is that everybody from the breakaway in blue and white and Yamina and even the Labor Gesher Meretz list and even the joint list with the United Arab list of Ra'am, the right-wing religious fundamentalists going ahead and supporting Netanyahu, that every single one of the parties that made a commitment one way or another, whether they were going to support Netanyahu and go into his coalition or not go into his coalition, were ended up being in a situation where some did and some didn't, because every one of those lists ended up being split. So what you can tell the Israeli voter, if you want to actually be truthful and not just go ahead and try to get some campaign points and say, oh, I'm going to do this and that, is to say this: who are you running for prime minister, or are you just running as a regular party? When you come to the president's residence, who are you going to nominate? Or are you going to say that you haven't made a decision that?
Well, so that being said, Jeremy, when it comes to the president's residence, right? Let's say that the election results are exactly what we have in the polls right now, all right? Just for the sake of argument. So that puts Yamina, of course, in fourth place, I believe, with 10 seats. That's not just far from the prime ministership. I mean, that clearly shows that they're not popular enough to be nominated by the other parties to be prime minister. So will he sit in a coalition with the Likud at least? Would he, would Bennett consider that?
You can choose to bring up that poll, which is the lowest poll that we've had, not just this week, but over the last few months. We've been higher in every other single poll that's been published in the last 6 months. But I'll tell you that even if that is the final result, Naftali Bennett is going to nominate himself. Yamina is going to nominate Naftali Bennett for prime minister. What happens after that process? I don't know. Uri doesn't know. Aaron, you don't know. Only God knows what is going to be the result at the president's residence. And any single party other than Meretz, I'll give Uri that. I don't even trust the joint list anymore. But at least Meretz, I believe them that they will not sit with Netanyahu. I can't say that about even Merav Michaeli these days. Well, I'm sure that every one of these politicians that is promising, I'm going to sit with Bibi, I'm not going to sit with Bibi, they have no idea what this government is going to look like. Take a look at that poll that you just had on the screen. There is no clear path for anyone to be prime minister.
I want to discuss that, and I want to talk about Labour Party and Merav Michaeli, because she's now the new head of the Labour Party. But before that, Uri, I want to come back to you. We just heard a sort of challenge for Meretz to maybe draw a line in the sand and say where the Meretz party will be standing in the next election. Who do you most support, I suppose, for prime minister, and who does Meretz hope to sit with in a coalition, should you be in the coalition?
Again, if there is an alternative of a center-left coalition, and we had a majority on the last two cycles, both in September 19 and in March 20. But the fact is that the leadership of the camp, the self-declared leadership, but the one that led the biggest party, meaning Blue and White, and Mr. Gantz, refused, which is unheard of in politics, refused to use its majority in order to topple Netanyahu and to become the prime minister because of the Arab involvement. As we see now, Netanyahu, who shouted out loud, how can you base your coalition on the joint list, they are not Zionists, I don't know, they support terror, and now he's being helped by the United Arab list, as Jeremy mentioned, an Islamic list, which I respect and everything, but Netanyahu is so cynical. But the former leadership of our camp in the last 3 cycles won the elections and didn't use that. Now, but having said all that, of course, we always prefer the only times that Meretz was in coalition in its history, in its over 20 years of history, was in 25 years history, was in left-led governments, labor-led governments. Now, the labor is, under any circumstances, not a candidate to form the next government. Perhaps Lapid might become a candidate. Of course, we prefer Lapid over Saar or Bennett because they're right-wing leaders, and Lapid is at least self-declared center leader. Is closer to us in his ideology. But we are on the other hand, we're open. We do believe that the greatest danger for Israel right now, and for Israel's democracy, is to have an indicted prime minister who is also leading a dangerous policy, both in the security arena and diplomatic arena, as well, and mostly in the internal arena, the way he's handling the coronavirus
so Uri,
crisis. We need to change the government. So,
Uri, what I'm hearing now primarily is that the campaign promises of Meretz are the same that many parties have expressed in previous elections and in the current one, that as long as Netanyahu is replaced, then we're happy. But that wasn't a strong enough campaign promise to overthrow Netanyahu in the previous 3 elections. So what's changed?
I didn't say that. As I said before, Meretz never supported a right-wing government.
No, not a right-wing government. I said that that Meretz.
For us, it's not Rak lo Bibi, as we say in Hebrew.
Just not Netanyahu.
Not Netanyahu or whatever. For us, it's the ideology, it's the principles, it's the values. That's what we care. If you have a government which will, reignite a peace process with the Palestinians, for example, which will rebuild the Israeli welfare system, which will handle the coronavirus with much more resources coming from the state to the small businesses, to the unemployed, to the educational system, all of that, all those ingredients of progressive social democratic policy, then we're possible candidates to be part of the government. Netanyahu, on top of the fact that he's a right-wing leader, which is very far from us, he's also an indicted prime minister, and he's wrecking our democracy, and therefore he's a no start to even talk to. And again, he doesn't want us because he's leading a very wrong policy.
But going back a moment now, because you described one fact, which is Netanyahu's indictments, and then another fact that he's a right-wing party with certain ideologies. But those ideologies are shared by other parties, including the New Hope Party of Gideon Sa'ar. Some of those policies that you were against are espoused.
Not exactly. I must say on Sa'ar's behalf, again, we don't support Sa'ar, but he's at least.
Well, so that's my point. Is that the list of the people you would sit behind is shrinking.
But Netanyahu right now, and the Likud party, which became the Netanyahu party, is attacking the Israeli judiciary, is attacking the Israeli bureaucracy, is attacking all the basic elements of the Israeli democratic structure. And therefore, he's a part of the fact that he's a right-winger, which, some people even say that he's not that much of a right-winger. He's wrecking, he's attacking the Israeli democracy out of his own personal interest, being standing to trial on bribery and other corruption
charges.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sometimes I lose my English in the middle of a sentence.
It happens to me all the time. But all right, so Jeremy, I want to turn back to you now. A minute ago we mentioned, Benny Gantz having dissolved his original partnership with Yair Lapid. Now he's tied in last place with 4 seats. And then we also, of course, Uri Zaki especially just mentioned the Labour Party as a natural partner to Meretz historically. But now, of course, Labour is also at the bottom. Are these parties essentially dead, or are we discounting them too soon, especially given the fact that Meretz just absorbed one of Blue and White's members, Ram Shefa, and of course,
No, it's Labor.
Labor. I'm sorry, that Labor did that, and of course brought in a new head, Merav Michaeli.
Right. I mean, I think the Labor Party might, if we look at the recent polls, now be instead of at 2%, at running about 3%. So given on the poll, if they're 3 or 3.5%, they're either in or out. But yeah, if we're talking about the 90s are over. I mean, again, I'm hearing Uri and he's talking about restarting the Palestinian process is one of the things that he's going to be looking at in the next prime minister candidate. Yeah, that was the Meretz Labor governments of the 90s. I think there's a reason why the last time Meretz entered a government was 1999. What can I tell you? We've gone over. It's been over 20 years since then. Israel's living in a different place. We have a different reality. And I think it's very clear, again, that if someone really, if they really, really, really hate Netanyahu and under no circumstances, all they care about is that Netanyahu is replaced, Meretz is a great...
It's not hatred. It's the fact that he's standing to trial. I mean, that's the problem. We have an indicted prime minister who has to go to... and who's taking the Israeli economy hostage, and the Israeli society and the Israeli democracy hostage to his own personal interest. That's why we say Netanyahu is a non-starter.
Again, we're not supporting Netanyahu for prime minister. We're supporting Naftali Bennett for prime minister.
Question: what will happen if Naftali Bennett will not be the prime minister?
Convince me that Netanyahu is responsible for a lot of bad things. In terms of the trial, though, look, it's I think it's a problem that Israeli law says this, but Israeli law allows him to be prime minister while he's on trial. I think it's a moral issue to go.
He wants to change the law, and you know that, Jeremy. He wants to change the law. He wants a free card out of this trial.
So
will you help him do that? That's his condition. That's his precondition.
I would love to see a change to the law so that we wouldn't be in the place that we are, but we are where we are, and there are a lot of people, for whatever reason, that still want to support him. And that's their right, but that's not something that either of us should be talking about.
No, but the question is whether you're going to change the law. If you'll be part of his coalition, and he will say, my threshold to join my coalition is to change the law in a way that would stop the trial against me. Whether you're going to help him or not, that's the biggest question.
Uri, what it comes down to is a matter of priorities in terms of getting Israelis back to work, in terms of making sure that we can, instead of having this on Zoom, be able to go to the studio.
So you'll give him a pardon.
Uri, one at a time.
Bribery with those excuses.
To me, the lives of Israelis are more important than what's going on the trial with Benjamin Netanyahu. I think people who are looking at the amount of dead and the fact that number is rising, and the fact that this month has had more than practically what we've had combined until now, I think that's what's on people's minds.
Well, so Jeremy, I guess my follow-up to you...
It's not on their minds.
Well, so Jeremy, my follow-up to you then is if Naftali Bennett and the Yamina Party are also very much, as you say, not excited to work with Netanyahu in the future, who are Yamina's natural partners?
Again, it's what we've said many times, that what we think is, instead of looking at this as yet...
But specifically, because we're talking about forming a coalition, right? Yamina can't do the whole thing alone.
Again, this isn't a question of right or left, and we've said this very, very clear. And by the way, we're the only party that no one's boycotting.
So which parties do you see as your natural partners in forming a coalition, should you be in that position?
In terms of the current Knesset parties that are key players, we're the only ones that are not being boycotted by anybody. We're not boycotting any of the other players that are key to this election. And what it comes down to is that we want to see a government that actually deals with the economy and the coronavirus, and doesn't go ahead and start talking about dealing with the Palestinians or dealing with judicial issues in Netanyahu's trial. Let's be honest, the majority of Israelis don't care about that right now.
It's not true, by the way. It's not true.
It's not true. Grave situation. People are dying, and this is the stuff we're talking about. I mean,
yes, we have a prime minister who's standing to trial on bribery. Yeah, and by the way, Aaron, you have a headline here. You hear that for Yamina, headed by Naftali Bennett, if it comes to them joining the government and with a precondition of Netanyahu, that he will get a law that would stop his trial, they will go for that because of coronavirus.
Well, that's not what Jeremy said, to be fair.
It's a very important headline.
Well, to be fair, that's not what Jeremy said.
That's not at all what I said. And we've always said that we're against retroactive bills in general because they're personal. But I'm saying that we do have a crazy situation. And by the way, it was Avshalom Vilan, who was from the Meretz party, your party, that voted for the current law that allows this situation to be. Okay, it wasn't my party that
Netanyahu voted against it, by the way.
What?
Netanyahu wanted.
Yeah, okay. You want to talk about what Netanyahu voted then? Reuven Rivlin and Vilan, all these people who voted for this law that now allow Netanyahu to even, and for people who don't know the law, even after Netanyahu, assuming he's convicted, even if he's convicted, he still does not have to resign. Even if his first appeal fails, he is allowed to remain prime minister until all appeals are exhausted, even past the first appeal. You know, this wasn't something that you can pin on us. This is something that you can ask.
But you do understand that the fact that we have an economical crisis and we don't have a national budget is because of his trial. It's not the law is not the only thing that is important here. It's also the way this guy runs the country according to his own personal legal interests. And that's the problem. And you can't ignore it. You can't ignore the impact it has on the way. The most important thing that you're talking about, which is how he handles the economy, for instance.
Impact. What I'm doing is I'm saying that you have to have a list of priorities. You have to order things where the most important thing is at the top. And at the top are people's lives. And yeah, to me, that's the most important thing. If that's a headline that Yamina puts people's lives over small
but because of his own interests, again, because of his own personal interests.
Every party should, frankly.
But Jeremy, you can't disconnect the two because of his personal interests, because he needs, for instance, the Haredi parties with him in all circumstances in order to get a free pass out of the trial. Then he overlooks many things that's happening over there, and then you get a spread of the virus, and then you get people who are dying.
Exactly.
All right, well, gentlemen.
My problem is the linkage of every single issue to Netanyahu. This election is not about Netanyahu.
All right, well, gentlemen.
He's the prime minister.
Gentlemen, I am loving the spirited debate here, and I hope to have you both back to continue this,
Hold on,
topic.
I want to add a personal note.
I have to end it here. I'm so sorry.
Just a second. Aaron, give me that, please. Jeremy, I hear that he's running in Yamina, and to all of our English-speaking viewers, you need to have a representative in the next Knesset. You should write to Naftali Bennett, tell him Jeremy is a great adversary. He's not, I don't agree with him completely, but he's a good adversary and can be a good representative to you guys in the Knesset.
All right, well, thank you both so much for that. I know that in the coming weeks we'll have a little bit more to talk about, and I hope to have you both back. Unfortunately, though, that is all the time that we have today. Thank you again, Uri Zaki and Jeremy Saltan, for joining us. And everybody watching, tune in next time on ILTV's Israeli Insider for more in-depth analysis. Also, if there's a topic that you want us to cover next, please let us know about it in the comment sections online. I promise we read them. And finally, remember that for more news from Israel, follow ILTV on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and subscribe to both our YouTube and Telegram channels. I'm Aaron Porras. Be safe, and thank you so much for watching.